Hello and welcome to Tree Talk. I'm Duane Rigsby along with Dave Apsley here, and we're going to talk about timber harvesting, aren't we, Dave?
We are. We are.
So with timber harvesting, it's a great topic to talk about. There's lots of people ask me questions about it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's a ton of people ask you questions about it. And we're in this area, rural Appalachia, southern Ohio. There's lots of woods, lots of trees, and probably one of the biggest industries around, I would say, wouldn't you?
It is. It's one of the bigger employers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even though you probably don't realize that, I mean, there's probably hundreds of little mom and pop cutting loggers, I would say, around. And then some of these, you will watch on TV, you see these great big TV logging shows and things like that, and that would be great, but you just don't see that around here. No.
But it is commonplace in southern Ohio. It's a big part of our economy. Mm-hmm. Without that, if you really think about what other employment opportunities, there wouldn't be many. So it's a renewable resource.
Yep.
It's owned by woodland owners like me and other folks who own that, and it's a great way to bring in some income. So it's one of those things you want to do your homework and do it right. Yeah. So we'll spend some time talking about that.
Well, we're going to talk about timber harvesting. We've got a good topic. We got some bunch of slides and pictures to go by. So here we go. So Dave, we got the first little thing Dave talks about is stop and think and get assistance. So tell us about what we're talking about getting assistance, Dave.
Well, the big deal is timber harvesting is not something you do every day. And it's something that most woodland owners don't really have a lot of information. They just, a lot of times, they make a quick decision, and then I get the call. And more often than not, folks aren't happy with the way it turned out because they didn't do their homework up front. So a good example is of somebody that did it right. I got an email shortly after doing a program on selling timber, and a woodland owner gave me some, said, hey, it worked great. I had a forester involved. We decided what we were going to harvest by talking it through, and the forester helped me do it. I got some bids in. I actually got a knock on the door and got an offer for about $5,000 initially for my timber. But after going through the whole process, I ended up getting $18,000.
And that's that's what you're talking about. You got an email about all that stuff.
I've gotten an email. I've talked to a lot of woodland owners, but more often I get the call that says, I had a timber sale. I didn't get paid what I thought it was going to be worth. What do I do? And I don't like the way it looks. And at that point, I can't help. So
it's a little too late.
Do it up front.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's important.
So all about this, we got a slide that does a little bit of some graphs here about why do Ohioans own forest lands. Okay.
And when you look at that graph, you spend a little time all the way over to the right. The second or third, I think, set of bars from the right are those that own their land for timber production. So most people, when you ask them, why do you own your woodlands, they don't say timber production. They say something else. They like to live in the country and be in the woods. They like to hunt. They just like the beauty of it. And a lot of people say, I don't want to sell timber. But when we look at that next slide, a lot of folks do sell timber.
Right.
So the numbers don't add up. You ask them, do they want to sell timber, and is that part of the reason for owning woodlands? They say no. But then when you look at the data, a lot more harvest than say they're going to harvest.
Right.
So they don't equal out. And so what I like to do is talk about why that is. Well, why do people harvest timber? It's all about money mostly.
It's all about money. You're right.
They need income.
It's all about money. And you notice that slide had a lot of what I see a lot of is firewood sales.
Right.
Even and a lot of times you may see that after somebody does all the logging, right? Is that
or they're just using it they're cutting the trees for use on their own farm.
Oh yeah,
for wood. Like I have a wood stove and I cut trees for firewood. But I usually pick the trees that are going to help other trees grow instead of deciding what to cut.
Right.
But the reality of it is people oftentimes don't know what their timber's worth. They get a knock on the door and somebody offers them money, and it's like, gosh, that's a lot of money, and I could use it.
Right.
Or
and our next picture, that's exactly what Dave's talking about is trees. Maybe certain trees are more valuable, right?
Right. And really, the big point of that slide is a lot of people make the decision to cut timber without knowing what it's worth. So what else do you sell that you don't have an idea what it's worth? If you're going to sell a car, you go to Kelly Blue Book.
Right.
If you're going to sell cattle, you know what the price per pound is, you know what your cow weighs, you have information when you make that decision. But most people don't have that information. They're clueless as to what it's worth
that brings up a question. Is there something out there that can say, oh well, if you've got a nice, say a 10-inch walnut tree with no limbs after 12 feet or something, is there something out there on the web or a booklet or pamphlet that say you'll get an average of $2 a board foot or whatever?
There are price sheets out there by board foot, but that's an average number, and most people don't know how many board feet are in their tree.
Right. Well, that's a whole other
we
thing.
can teach you how to do that, to measure the trees and get an estimate of that. But the big hard factor where it takes an experienced forester to help you is quality. So the difference between a low quality tree, that might be worth 5-10 cents a board foot. A high quality veneer tree might be worth $5 a board foot. So if you miss that high quality tree and you're not getting paid for the high quality tree, you're really losing out.
Right. And depending on who you're getting your wood cut with, they might kind of snitch in and go, well, you know, they were all average trees. And what you're talking about, getting somebody a little bit ahead of time, that'll give you that little advantage and say, no, we've got some little bit more high dollar trees in there.
We'll get into a process here to talk about how to find out what you've got. And so, but it is important to know what you've got out there and have an idea what it's worth. You never know until you get the bids in.
Right.
But you've got to have a decent idea what you're selling. Otherwise, you know, you talk about buyer beware, it's seller beware. If you don't know what you're selling, you're probably not going to get a fair price for it.
Right.
So we've got a process. We like to
Absolutely.
make it a competitive process so that multiple people are bidding on what you're trying to sell.
So we got our next slide goes to erosion.
Right.
I couldn't get the word out there. And that has to deal with how good the logger is in general, right?
It's a lot of things. It's a lot about planning. And this is this is a site that I was on. That ditch is probably 4 feet deep.
Really?
And that soil was going right into a creek. So again, planning it through, having a forester help lay out the roads, and avoiding wet conditions when you're harvesting, which we can talk about how to do that later. But it's all about in the contract. And if you have a qualified logger and a forester helping design it, you can avoid a lot of that. And you can't always not disturb some soil, but we can certainly minimize it, we can keep it manageable, and we can keep it out of the creek. So that's a really important part of that.
Right. Now you were talking about a logger doing that. Now there's a thing out there that I understand is called a master logger.
There are.
What is a master logger compared to a normal?
So in Ohio, you don't really need any qualifications to call yourself a logger. You have a chainsaw and a truck, some way to drag the trees out, and you're a logger. But in Ohio, we have a voluntary program called the Ohio Master Logger Program. And so those folks have had training on how to minimize erosion, how to cut trees safely so they're not going to be injured, but also to do it in a way that doesn't damage other trees.
Right.
Ohio Master Loggers are trained, they keep their training up, and then they carry insurance as well. So, things
good.
you don't think about. If a logger gets injured on your property, and you start thinking about workers' comp,
that guy could sue you if they were.
It could go backwards.
Shady, I guess, yeah.
So, workers' comp and liability insurance are all things that master loggers can offer you. So, those are all questions, and those are just more reasons to have a forester. A forester could be almost like your consultant or your lawyer or your accountant that's helping represent you, because they do this every day. They know all the pitfalls. They know what can go wrong, and they know how to do it in a way that's going to benefit you as a woodland owner. Yes, you'll pay a little bit for that, but in the long haul, you'll come out ahead.
You come out and have better looking land and all that stuff. And if you're doing that and they're a master logger, that erosion piece that we just seen should look like this slide coming up here. It should look a lot better. With what is it, Dave, called a water bar in there, and you almost can't even see it.
So a water bar is one of the tools we use, and it's all about managing water in small quantities. If you have, in this part of the world, we've got hills, and if you run a logging or a skid trail from the bottom of the hill to the top or vice versa, water is going to pick up speed, you're going to get more of the water, and it's going to carry the soil off. But if we break that up in small quantities and divert it into the woods, the soil in the woods will take up that water and prevent it from flowing over the surface, and then we can really eliminate the erosion. So we can put these things called water bars in to divert water and really prevent almost all of that. And you can do it at the end of the job, or during say the logger's going to pull off for the weekend and we got one of these thunderstorms, which we've had daily anymore.
Yeah, they just kind of pop up out of the blue.
You know it's going to happen. You know you're going to get 2 inches of rain. You put that water bar in and you're going to eliminate 90% of that pretty easily. The other big piece is just if it's excessively wet, that's when a lot of that damage. When you start rutting things up, it's no different in your yard. You don't want people pulling in your yard when it's super wet.
You don't want to do that.
You want to try to minimize some of that.
And then a finished product should look something like this, right?
Yeah, this is actually a picture from one of our state forests the fall after a logging operation that happened that very spring. And that highlighted part, the grass down below, is actually seed on a water bar. And that area had a harvest. It still looks very attractive. There was income off of that piece of property, but it's still manageable. You still have access to it, and you still have trees left to grow and manage for the future. So it can be done right. It's a process, and if you're informed and you have help, you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. You can get some income. You can actually get some improvements to your woods. You can get rid of some diseased or dying trees. You can favor trees that might help produce food for your wildlife, like acorns. But if you don't plan it out and don't get help, you never know what you're going to get. So that's an important part of that.
So what are we talking? We're talking about what timber's worth and things like that. So what the reality of it is, and what is
the tough part is timber prices can vary wildly across the board. And why is that? Well, it comes down to quantity, how much you're selling, but more than anything, quality. So if wood goes into paper, that's probably the lowest value, or chips that go for energy, that's the lowest value use, and smaller damaged and diseased trees can be used for that.
Right, because they just chip it up in little stuff.
But on the other extreme, if it's peeled as veneer, a board foot, which is a square piece, it doesn't have to be square, but it's a foot by an inch thick, can be worth up to $10 a board foot.
Wow.
So 10 cents or 5 cents up to $10. So if you don't know about quality and you're selling it at the low quality rate, you're really could be hurt.
You could be selling that tree for $1 where you could be selling it for $100.
And in the heyday, there were trees worth tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
Now it's not uncommon to have a high quality tree worth a few $1,000s. So that one tree per acre can be worth more than several acres of low grade. So there again, if you don't have somebody representing you to help you know what you've got and what it's worth, then you really just don't know. And chances are, if you're not making it a competitive process, you're probably not going to get the full value of that.
Absolutely. So with that, Dave, we're going to take a real quick break, and then we're going to get back into, I think, inventory and what you should do next. Things like that. All righty? So we'll be right back. Welcome back to Tree Talk. Dave Apsley, Natural Resource Specialist for Ohio State University Extension. Duane, I'm here located at the South Centers. Dave, we were talking about timber harvest, what you should do, what you should look for, a little bit of land management. We've been throwing a lot of stuff out there. So when we go to start this whole process, we already talked about we should get some good recommendations, either come to you or a natural resource or a forester, somebody like that to get a hold of before you even sell, even think about even trying to get a bids. So after that, we're talking about inventory. So what do we need to do for inventory? We've got a couple of topics here. Let's let you talk.
Before we jump into that, it's really important too to just make sure that you're working with a forester to decide, okay, here's the main reason I own it, and if I have this sale, is it no longer be good to hunt anymore? You really need to make sure that the sale matches your goals. So you need to talk that process through to make sure that, gosh, I own this property because I love the beauty, and now I have some kind of sale that doesn't look as nice, or whatever. So just talking that through with the forester before you ever start. Here's why I own it. What kind of sale can we do that matches up?
Yeah,
so that's a real important
That's
part.
a good thing. Is what is your vision that it's going to look like later? Because it's going to take a while to grow them trees back to make it look like. So you just can't like build something back and
it takes time.
Yeah,
it takes time.
Yeah.
So back to the inventory part. Once you decide what you're going to sell, you need to have an idea of what you're selling. So you need to determine what kind of trees you're selling. Are they oak? Are they cherry? Are they walnut? Or are they soft maple? And the quantity. What about the quality? And what we really recommend they do is paint or mark every tree to be harvested so that when they get people to come out and look at it, whoever's bidding on it are all bidding on the same trees.
Right.
I could have 4 loggers come out or 4 timber buyers come out, give me 4 different prices. Well, the lower price might be the best one because they're going to leave the better quality trees for later. This way, there's no doubt everybody's on the same page.
These are the trees that you take, and that's it.
And you're working with that forester to say, I'm taking this one, and more importantly, what am I leaving for the future? That's what a forester brings to the table is, what are you going to leave? What's going to be there after the sale? What's going to benefit from the harvest?
Right.
So that's part of it, but marking those trees and having a list of what you're selling is real important up front.
Yeah. So that way you could even maybe have a harvest now and have another harvest in 5 years or something. Those trees that are just almost mature.
Yeah,
normally they shouldn't be
normally
taken right now. Maybe
depending on how many acres. Normally, if you're small acreage, you probably can't return every 5, but maybe every 10 or 20.
Yeah.
But thinking about that long term, one thing that really bothers me is to see that 10 or 12-inch tree harvested, and it's worth 10 cents a board foot today. But as it gets bigger, it can go from pulpwood to saw timber, which can go into furniture and flooring, or to veneer. And if you miss that opportunity to increase in quality, you're missing the jumps in value of that tree.
Right.
So, sometimes holding on to it until it gets a little bigger and can be sold as a higher value product can really benefit you. So you might not make as much money today, but in the future you're going to have a lot more potential.
Yeah, in a short amount of time, you might be able to triple your price even. So.
Yeah, I've got some examples that are, Penn State did a study, and by holding on to it at 7-year increments, I think if they held it on a tree for 20 years, it increased in value by like 30 times.
Really?
So it's a huge
That
difference
is
by
amazing.
Harvesting too soon. So you want to make sure you don't miss that opportunity to gain in value. So that's important too.
Okay. Well, now we got another slide with some numbers on it that we were just talking about Jackson County because, Dave, you're from Jackson County. So what are we talking about here? This looks like inventory and some board foot
it's
stuff.
just kind of an example, and if you use the analogy of a sale, like an auction, if you don't have a sale bill out there that people know what's for sale, you're not going to bring people to the table. So if you have an inventory, this is like a little list of what we've got for sale. So when you advertise, gosh, there's a timber buyer out there that needs cherry, and I'm selling so many of them, and they're this big. They know it's worth their trip to come out. So it helps you with your advertising, and that's the key point is we need to advertise.
Yeah.
You need to know what you're selling, so you need to know who to mail that advertisement to. Good example, I worked at Fort Knox, Kentucky. We had a lot of timber sales where we sold timber locally, but when we had quality white oak, people from Ohio came down and bought it. Because we knew what we had and we mailed it to them. We said, hey, we've got veneer quality white oak, come and look on it. And when they bought it, a lot of times it was a lot more money. Sometimes double and triple what the other bids are.
Wow.
So it's important to know that.
Yeah. And again, that's all, we try to drive this whole topic back of getting the right person in to help you with it rather than just offering up, to sell it. So again, phone up Dave or find a natural resource person or a local forester would be, would a state park lead you in the right direction if you don't know anybody?
Probably not. When we get towards the end, I got a couple slides that'll point to who to talk to.
There you go.
But it's foresters that you're going to want to look for.
So you need to find foresters. Okay. So we were talking about sales. What kind of other sale? What is a good sale?
A couple things. This is a little complicated terminology, but there are 3 ways you can sell timber. Lump sum means you're paid in full. So that list of trees that we're selling, you get paid in full before the first tree's harvested. So people put in bids, they pay you, and then they come and harvest it. Selling on shares just means that logger's going to cut the tree, they're going to take it to the mill, and you get a percentage of it.
Percentage of what they get.
You don't know what that's going to be until you get the check. You also, if they're not selling at the highest value, then you're going to get a low percentage.
Yeah.
And if it's a high quality tree, they get the same percentage if it's a low quality tree.
Yeah.
So think about the $10 per board foot tree versus the 10 cents per board foot tree. Getting 50% of that low value tree is probably fair, but 50% of the high value tree may not be so fair. So to take all that out, we like to mark the trees, sell them as a group, as a lump, and then you get paid in full prior to the harvest.
Right then.
You might have a perfectly honest broker out there that goes bankrupt for some reason.
Well, yeah.
Trees go to the
Sure.
mill and you don't get paid. So we highly recommend getting paid before the trees are harvested as well. So that's really important.
That's pretty good. I like that analogy. You get your money right up front, and then when you do the sale, do you try to give the logger a set time? You know, hey, I'd like to have this done by 2 months or whatever. And I understand weather and things like that's an issue, but
what we typically do is you don't want to reduce that too much. As long as you're paid up front, then that reduces that urgency on your part.
Right.
And what you like to do is give that logger, and probably a year's a good average, because if they're bidding on it, they want to be able to take advantage of markets too. To get the top dollar, they might want to hold your trees until they need them or until the demand goes up in the fall or whatever. And then you mentioned the weather. It's important to give them time so we're not forcing them to work when its conditions aren't right. Clock's running out and they got to get the trees out. Then
sometimes they may not take care of your land too.
Well,
very well that way.
If the time's short and the ground's wet, you can have that.
Yeah.
But if you have a longer time period, you have a forester that's working with you, and your contract says, hey, if the conditions are too wet, we're going to shut you down for a week or a couple days. If you're the only landowner that doesn't have that in the contract, guess where they're going to be when it's wet?
Yeah.
So it's important to think all that through and to avoid those conditions. I would rather extend a contract, give them time to do it right, than to force them into a box. And again, for most landowners, as long as they're paid up front, whether it extends another month or two is not really
they don't
a big
really
deal.
care about it. Now, Dave, you mentioned a few words right there. Contract. A little history about me. My dad was a logger several years ago, and they just went in on farms or wherever they found timber, and they talked to the landowner like you did, and they most generally they paid either up front or in a share. And what they did was they just did a little handshake, and that was it.
That was it.
So that wasn't really any way of protecting that landowner.
Right.
So contracts. So we should now be getting contracts and in that contract stating all this information. Right?
You know what they say about assume? When you break that down.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's not that somebody's dishonest or the other person's dishonest. It's like, I'm thinking this and you're thinking that.
Right.
And we never discuss it. We never ask that question. And I'm the landowner that there's something I want to be sure that's not going to happen. Like you're not going to travel on this road, or you're not going to harvest during deer season or whatever.
Right.
You got to have it in a contract. You can't assume it. It's unfortunate that's the way the world is, but if it's not in the contract, you're not sure it's going to happen. And we like to put things like how long's the contract, how are we going to get paid, when we're going to get paid. Even things like you do your homework and say it's your dad and he's got the best reputation as a logger.
Right.
And all of a sudden he's not able to log it, so he just transfers the contract to somebody else. And that guy's not so good.
Yeah.
So that's in the contract. Nobody else can log it except for you unless I approve them.
Without your approval,
Right.
I like that idea.
So there's lots of things, and that's a whole discussion we don't have time to get into. But a well-trained forester has seen it all. They've done it all. They know, based on your situation, what you want to have in that contract. And as much as we hate to have to go that way, it's just a way to protect that landowner, to make sure that what we agree on happens out in the woods. And what happens if that logger does damage to the fence or damages your most valuable tree that you were saving for the future by not felling it safely? And if they damage that tree, do you get paid and how much? And things like that you just can't assume is going to happen without going through the motions of having it in the contract.
Now, with the contract, I'm assuming, I don't know, can you find an example online that you kind of can go by, build? Again, is it that forester that's going to help you with that?
I highly recommend the forester with experience that knows what to put in the contract. and knows based on your situation and what you tell them. You know, sample contracts are a little dangerous, and we don't really recommend just picking one off the shelf and using it, because your situation, every landowner, every piece of property, every logger are different, and you want to make sure that contract doesn't have a bunch of extra stuff you don't need, but has what you need to protect yourself.
And that professional can look at your land and tell you that, right?
Even things like the best management practices and filing a form with soil and water, so that, you know, here are the things that are going to be done to prevent erosion. There's lots of things that we can put in a contract. A performance bond. Put an extra 10% aside so that if damage happens. Lots of things, which, again, that's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other topic. We can certainly talk about that for contracts and what you should and shouldn't have in there. Absolutely.
Yep.
So after we get logged all the ground and finished up, what do you got? What do we got left after harvest?
Well, it depends on how good the planning was and what the thought process was, and if you had a forester involved. Because as foresters, we're trained to manage trees, grow trees for the future. And so if you fail to plan, you know, you get what you get. And so that contract, it's just that whole process of doing it right. Deciding what trees to harvest is a big key, and how you're going to harvest them. And so I just highly recommend working with that forester, thinking the whole process through. A lot of times, a lot of misinformation. People want to do what they call a select cut, and that sounds good because we're only doing a partial cut. But it really depends on who's doing the selecting.
Well, that's true.
And what are you selecting for? Am I selecting trees to harvest that are, when I take them out, is going to leave room for the trees I want to keep? Or am I just looking at what they're worth today? So there's a process. There's different ways to harvest trees, and you need to match those up with you as a landowner. And the best way to do that, there's a slide in here that's coming up on foresters.
And what? This is some kind of directory we have, Dave?
Yeah, it's a directory, and it'll list different types of foresters. Division of Forestry, service foresters are those that are on the right side of the screen. Those are folks that can give you advice up front and help you write a management plan and do things like that. But when it comes to selling timber, we recommend hiring a consultant, a forester working for you. Those are the ones on the left. And they can help you with this process. That's what they do every day. They'll work on a percentage of the sale. But again, you're probably going to have more money left over at the end by paying them that percentage and getting the higher price for what you're selling than you would if you just did a percentage deal. So those foresters are out there to help you. That directory is osafdirectory.com. Just a great resource, a way to get help. They're there to help you, and I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. And then you got one last thing. We're about out of time. Call before you cut. Dave, tell us about this little website.
Call Before You Cut is a one-stop shop. We're not here to tell you what to cut or what to keep. We're just providing information. So if you're thinking about selling timber, go to this website. It's callbeforeyoucut.com. Or you can call that 800 number, 877-424-8288. And if you go there, you can order a free packet of information that'll go through what we talked about and a lot more. And they'll mail it directly to you. If you go online and request that packet, I get an email. And I can respond to your questions. If you got a situation,
That's awesome.
I'll get that email and I'll start communicating with you to be there to help you through it. Believe me, we're not here to talk you out of harvesting timber. It's an important thing to do. But it's also important to do it in a way that's sustainable into the future. So we're here to help.
And you had, we just popped up Dave's information. By all means, give Dave a call, send him an email message, things like that. If you have questions about foresting, or trees, or harvesting, or anything like that, Dave is certainly a person that you could first contact, and then he'll lead you in the way. Dave, I appreciate it. We're out of time. We could talk about this, I think, even longer, but
absolutely.
For me, Dave, we'll talk to everyone later. Everybody have a great day.
All right, thanks for having me.